the comedian Ali Wong, she had this great bit so it's like, me and my friends, we used to work real hard, and we'd like, we were boss babes and whatnot, and like we used to make fun. One of my friends was like, saw a stay-at-home mom, and she was like, look at her, and they were talking down to her, and I looked at my friends and I was like, that woman is retired. Like, we need to like what, we've got it all wrong. She's like, I believe the lie. Or like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. It is election night, or afternoon, I should say. It's night for me here when we're recording this. Probably won't be when we hear this. So we're sitting here in the tension, of waiting for election results and all that good stuff, and trying to talk about what we were going to talk about today. And this week, I was going through news, kind of trying to find stuff that wasn't election related, and I came across an article. It was a New Yorker article, basically covering why Gen Z women are no longer more religious than men, and that's like allegedly, or that was from Christianity Today, actually. And the article was really interesting. I found this interesting because if you've been in church for a long time, or if you've worked in ministry, or if you just maybe you've even just stumbled into a church, one of the things you'll probably notice or will have noticed is that women tend to outnumber men in church by quite a bit. I think historically it's been somewhere around two-thirds of attending, people in the church are women compared to men. And so reading that, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I wonder what that's about. And it also kind of resonated with me that this was being commented on by the New Yorker, because if you've been listening to the podcast for, a period of time, you'll know that what we've been talking about a lot and what we've been noticing is kind of a resurgence of people caring about their core values and worldview. And so what we're going to look at today is like, hey, what does this kind of tell us about where we are and where we've come from? But then more importantly, what does this say about where we're going, and what does that mean for us, for Christians, men and women? But, predominantly in this context, we're a bunch of dudes, and we see the data on YouTube anyway, and it turns out that most of you are guys too. Shocker, right now. So
15 to 20% of women that put up with us.
If you're a lady listening, comment below. If you're a man listening, comment below. It is always cool to hear who our listeners are.
So what was your thoughts? Like when I sent you guys the article, when you read the title, like what was your kind of first impression on that?
It's interesting. The question that I had is like, has it traditionally always been this way where women were essentially the tended to be the highest attenders in church? I don't think it was always like that when you go back to, post-Reformation or even pre-Reformation. I think this is more of a 20th century thing with, you were saying something about like the Great Awakening and how that has affected it. Yeah,
when you look at within church history as it relates to America, we'll speak to that, right? And that's probably something we have the most well documented. But like the Second Great Awakening, and kind of comes out to around the time of the Civil War, and we have this basically this big revival of people going to church. But it was largely led by women. So, in some cases, you had a lot of guys coming back from the war.
Most people didn't come back from the war, though.
Right, whoever came back.
You didn't have a whole lot of men to attend church.
You're not wrong. But the ones that did, they didn't have a PTSD diagnosis. They just had alcoholism. So this became a problem, right? And so a lot of stuff that we see that came out of the Second Great Awakening, like a lot of our charitable organizations, Salvation Army, a lot of this stuff, even the Bible Belt is just like the stop marks of tent revivals, where basically, women would drag their husbands, and part of the message was you need to get sober, you need to come to Jesus. And so that's what they talk about, getting on the wagon, right? And so these church services just became ways of continuing the good emotional response and the religious experience that you would get at like a tent revival. And I know a lot of you, if you're younger, I don't know how many of you even remember revivals or have even been to one, or even if you grew up in the South and you know what I'm talking about, like when you would go to a week of church basically every night with, you know, a different speaker or the same speaker, and like lots of, you know, singing and testimonies being shared.
Lots of people getting saved.
It's a very high emotional experience, you know, for a lot of people, and a lot of people got saved that way during that period. And so, again, in this picture, from that point, basically coming up into the modern era, you know, women have tended to be the ones dragging their families to church. Not in all cases. But
and so now the article, it says that, you know, essentially you have nearly 40% of Gen Z women now identifying as religiously unaffiliated compared to 34% of men. And I think I wonder if there's a distinction there, is it's Gen Z specifically. I think that the interesting aspect of the way that the next generation, or Gen Z men and women, the way that they're approaching life and the world, they tend to actually, there was a study that they tend to be a little bit more conservative in their worldview, in their politics, in the way that they behave, probably because they don't really trust any of the previous generations to take care of them. And so there is this kind of push toward conservatism, not necessarily politically, but potentially. But I also think that there's the culture, and what we see in the culture regarding the whole like red pill movement, for instance, right? With masculinity, and now there's some different extremes to that it goes different ways. But one of the interesting things that could be said is you had within the early 2000s on to, I mean, even now, you've had preachers like Mark Driscoll, who's very, very passionate about speaking to men. You've had other non-Christians, technically non-Christian, Jordan Peterson. Was he a baptism, Jordan? So where he you know, came out with his 12 rules for life, and a lot of his teaching and a lot of the things that he's spoken on is a return to traditional values, which really align with the church. And so I wonder if that has a little bit of influence in this next generation coming up.
Yeah, so check this out. This is interesting. So what we're seeing with Gen Z is a generation that has grown up really, they're not like us, you know, the millennials, especially the older millennials and the Gen X, where we had this, you know, different picture. You know, we grew up with people who grew up in the 50s, like our grandparents were from the 50s. And
right.
So, you know, like, and we have this picture of like, you know, society still was relatively conformed to gender roles. That was breaking and changing, you know, through the feminist movement and a bunch of other stuff. But we were still raised in the shadow of that, really. This generation has not had that. And so really what they have is just the fruit of feminism, just the fruit of, you know, a consumerist, you know, oriented, relativistic postmodern society. The difference, I would say, the reason that we're seeing more men come to this conclusion than women right now is this, exactly what you pointed out. The voices that are calling people to what we would consider to be a biblical vision of masculinity. Even Jordan Peterson's early stuff, even he said that before he was even a Christian. But a biblical model of responsibility, a biblical model of
just gonna slide that in there.
Gender roles.
You're gonna just go, we gotta go.
You're gonna
roll
get
past
that.
that.
But then you have, even before that, to your point, Mark Driscoll was the same thing. He's like, hey, we got to get after the men. He used to call the men to higher regard, right? Where are the female voices doing the same thing?
Ooh, that's another. Oh man, that's a great conversation. And Nick, let me let you go first before I just open up that. If you want to say something or comment on it.
No, I mean, to your question, you have like the Priscilla Schreiers of the world, and Priscilla
I don't even know who that is.
I think that's who it is. And then the Gay Girl, Good God.
She had a.
Jackie Hill Perry,
and
then
there's some.
You know, there are some feminine leaders in the evangelical communities, but
are they calling women to a more like to be
not overtly. So there's still the miss. I mean,
I've
just
feminists for instance.
Yeah, no.
They're not pushing a particular
evangelical
ideology.
leaders.
Right, but they're not red pill, like they wouldn't be branded like many of like they're not Joe Rogan, they're not,
No. Well,
they're not
some of them
kind of.
Are they? Okay, that's cool.
They're pushing back against culture. They're pushing back against like gay culture and gay church and they're pushing back against the feminist progressive values for sure. And there is a movement. I mean, outside the whole trad wife thing. You make an excellent point, Josh, when you say this next generation really only responds to the fruit because they don't have the teaching essentially there. And the fruit of it is these women are getting career jobs and they're not getting married till they're 30, if at all. And they're looking back and they're like, man, I would just like to have kids. And I want to be a trad wife. That's all I want to do.
Ali Wong, the comedian Ali Wong, she had this great bit when, so it's like, me and my friends, we used to work real hard and we'd like, we were boss babes and whatnot. And like, we used to make fun, one of my friends was like, saw a stay-at-home mom and she was like, look at her, and they were talking down to her. And I looked at my friends and I was like, that woman is retired. Like, we need to like what, we've got it all wrong. She's like, I believe the lie. Or like, there's other memes where it's like, I accidentally went and like boss babes too hard. And now I'm, I have adult responsibility and home responsibility and husband responsibility. And they're like, they're starting to realize, that it's problematic. Right. But at the same time, there's a barrier there because unlike men where the carpet's already been there for them, right? Like it's been laid out like, hey guys, we got vision, we got purpose, we got work for you to do. We have identity. Like just step onto the path, my friend, and come see what God created you for. But women look at the church, and this article covers this. Women look at the church and they say patriarchal, a confused perspective on where we belong, right? Whether or not you have a complementarian or egalitarian view, like it's not clear, and nobody's painting a clear picture of what their life and identity and culture looks like, and what the frustrating thing is even when you do paint that, it's diametrically opposed to what they've been raised on. Almost diametrically opposed to it, and that's where I think what this data is showing and what's kind of being painted is that, for people who didn't grow up seeing the good or having a good model of what that looks like, or having at least an image of what a good godly woman or what being a woman in the way that God designed, our societies and our families to be, they're like, that's a barrier. They're like, I don't know if I want to be a part of that.
Can I speak to that a little bit? Because this is one of the things I think we've talked about this in the past on, whether we were, doing, hanging out or something. But we talked about like the role of older women in teaching younger women on these things. Let me share my screen because I think that it's Titus 2 talks about this. Let's see. It says, but as for you, teach according to sound doctrine. Older men would be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness, which men just, I guess, historically within the last 100 years just have not really stepped into that role. And then it says, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. And then talks about urge your younger men to be self-controlled, show yourself in all respects to be of more these. So this is great. I mean, it talks about roadmap of, hey, this is good behavior. But I think oftentimes when people read this, they think barefoot and pregnant. They think all of these negative connotations to what biblical femininity is, which is not really what this is saying. I think that mainly it's talking about being a good Christian and presenting yourself with a good culture, Christian culture, but having some sort of accountability within women as well as men.
Josh,
but women are not necessarily teaching young women to essentially, hey, be good moms, be good stepping into that role,
because they're not showing them an identity, Josh. They're not showing the picture of what it looks like. What is the positive of that?
Right. Well, that's true. How many young women in Gen Z are looking at their mothers and seeing a stay-at-home trad wife? Most of them are all working.
Or
right?
why is
Most
that
of
good?
their all mothers are working.
Show me why it's good. Like this is the difference. If you show me that and I talk about the men, all those things, sober-minded, steadfast, in the brain of a man, what do you envision when you read that? Like bring that passage back up and read the male part again. And think about what comes to your brain when you read that passage. Like,
so it's older men to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness.
All right, pause right there. Pause, Josh. Mm-hmm. Don't just read through it. Like, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Does that sound appealing to you as a man?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nick?
Yeah.
100%.
Okay. Now,
I mean, that's the conversation rather than, commenting on the state of femininity in the modern church. It's like, but it is. We can talk about the men.
But we can talk about the women too. I'm talking about both.
Well, sure, but three dudes talking about the women might not be a good fit. But yeah.
Well, no, that's kind of the point, though,
also,
Nick.
all three of us are married.
No,
as
but
well.
Who's responsible? No, hold on. Pause. Who's responsible? So then here's the question. So if we're not doing this, right? So here's the real
we're not doing this,
question.
Meaning what? What are we not doing?
We're rarely doing any of this very, very well, but we're 100%. What the data is showing, what this article is pointing out, is that we're making some changes that are apparently appealing to the men, right?
To the men,
we're getting the men. Something's changing, right? And we can talk about that in a second. But here's what gets me. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine, to teach what is good, and so to train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, so that the word of God may not be reviled. In other words, this is in service of the Great Commission, in service of the proclamation of the gospel on earth. And so whose responsibility is, what does it say? He gave the apostles, prophets, teachers, right, all these roles, Ephesians 4:12, to equip the saints for the work of the kingdom. Who is responsible to ensure that this happens in our churches and in our societies?
Is the answer you're looking for men?
I mean, I have an answer in mind, but I'm asking, what do you think? Am I saying there's a right answer? Yes, I think there is. But what do you think, Nick?
I think it's. Oh, go ahead.
I think it's not as simplistic. In what I mean by that is, yes, at its core, the three of us here believe that it should be men that hold leadership roles in the church, and therefore that means that it is at some level a male leadership failure to not properly elevate and honor their older women in such a way that curates discipleship from older women to younger women. And I would agree with you wholesale that's not done in the church at all. I may not just, I would love to do an entire episode about that. Yeah. It would be wonderful. We should have like some
100%
woman come on that's older. Hey, your mom would be perfect for that.
Oh, great.
To come in, and that'd be an amazing episode.
Or throw back to Debbie. I just say this
because... I could get Debbie.
That would be great. But I don't say that to push back on you, cool. Nick, but I say that because this has been the problem, is that we advocate men are like, we can't speak into that space. We can't comment on these things. No, we absolutely can, because this isn't Josh's opinion or other Josh's opinion. We just cracked open Titus and read it straight from the Word of God, and then I put it right back to Ephesians 4:12. This is not, hot take Harry over here trying to say what I think women should or shouldn't do. What I'm pointing out is the data is showing that this new generation of women aren't resonating, and I'm saying it's our fault. I'm saying that we haven't, as a society, elevated models that show them, if you do these things, this is what your life could be like. This is the good and the grace and the glory that comes from being a steadfast, sober-minded, loving woman that nurtures and serves her God in whatever role he places her in. But we have countless examples in the Bible of women like that. But for men, it's more natural. When you think about a good king or a good knight, you think of a sober-minded, wise, person. So for us, it's like, yeah, I want that, because we have all these examples that lead to that. And this is where I think the reason I kind of brought that up, and I say that it's ultimately our responsibility as men and as older men and as elders and pastors in churches, of which all of us are. That's why I specifically point the finger at us to say, how are we doing that? Because that's what kind of hit me ultimately, was like, man, I have neglected to highlight something. I've become aware of a blind spot that, like, how do they get to see the good in it? Like, they can see it and say, I'll just obey it because that's what the Bible says. But where's the picture of the final result?
Go back to that verse. Share your screen again, Anderson. I agree with you.
You just leave it up.
I agree with you.
Edit it out.
No, it's good to.
No, I know you agree. I know you agree. Yeah.
But let me say to what you just said. You're not wrong, but I would also say that in the order of broken priorities, we can and should start with older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled,
Bingo.
sound in faith, in love, in steadfastness. And we can't get that right. So, yeah, we can then and should at some point talk about women and their ability to shepherd and disciple one another and all the beauty that is in that next verse 3. But verse 2 is wholesale not being adopted in the church.
Right.
And there's a good argument that if you submit yourself to verse 2, that verse 3 will happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah,
I
think
share
that,
now if you want, Anderson.
Yeah, I think that there's a something to be said about the way that we have approached in the church, because I think that there's so much here when we read that verse that I'm reading what the man should be doing, and what you had said, Josh. What do you feel for that? What do you get out of that? And we were like, oh, this is great. Like, this sounds really good. Now I got to share it again because I want to just leave it up. Right?
That's good.
But when you maybe asking the same question
for those
if you're
listening,
a woman, and
we're
this is,
in
hey,
Titus
let
2.
us know if you're a woman and you're watching this. What do you think? What goes through your mind?
Comment
Older
below.
women likewise be reverent in behavior, not slanderous or slaves to much wine. Don't be wine moms. Okay,
That's right.
Don't be going gossiping about other people. Those are the slanderous and slaves to much wine. That's like the weakness that Paul calls out to women. Whereas being self-controlled, sound in faith or faithfulness, and in love and steadfastness, like that's a huge thing. When I think of this as a man, I think, oh, yeah, that's not a hard thing. But wait, let's take a step back. As a man, maybe this isn't something that is so held in our society where we hold men accountable. Like, when was the last time that you've lost your temper? That's not what a man should do. When's the last time that you've been, that you haven't been steadfast in your love towards the people that are under your authority or to the people that are in your community? These are things that should be challenging, that I think we breeze over. And so these things should be challenging. And then in another way, looking at this, to train in verse 4, so to train young women to love their husbands and children, I think the poison of feminism looks at that as being, right? What is that you were expecting me to be loving towards your husband and children? And feminism reads so much into that, wherein the reality is, like, this is something that is so beautiful that I think women looking at other women being loving to their husbands and children would desire. And evidence of that is, the oh my gosh, that's a fake TikTok video of them being, perfectly submissive or perfectly loving and not getting angry with their children. We know what right looks like. Right. And I think that's what Paul is doing here. This is what right looks like. So I think there's.
Yeah, Josh.
Go ahead.
No, I think that, like, when you look at, like, We's picture of what right looks like, look at our last episode that we did on, what a man's role is in the birth process. It's about taking leadership in a vulnerable situation and state. And look at the comments that we got, and some of the best feedback I got was from doulas when we talked about how vital, how indispensable. And what are we talking about with a doula? Like, I think a doula is probably one of the best models in many cases, or at least a clear model of what this can look like, because this is an experienced woman who has walked a hard road, who understands all the emotional and physical stress and anxiety that is associated with doing arguably the hardest self-sacrificial, literally could end in your own death.
Absolutely.
Right? Of the bringing a new life into the world, right? And I look at, and then we made the joke, about Debbie. I was like, it wasn't a joke because I actually did this, where I literally went to Debbie afterwards and I was like, could you mentor my wife? Like, would you be into that? Like, and she did. But that's what I'm saying is, like, that woman is a hero, not just to women, but to other men. Like, that is a woman to be elevated, to be celebrated, to be, and I don't know a woman out there who wouldn't want to feel just like how men do, where we want to feel like we were contributing and we were needed and we were more than just known by other people, by our association with someone else, which is how I think, at least from what I hear from my own wife and other women I counsel, is how, especially in the season of being a mother with young children, is you end up, you're just your kid's mom or so-and-so's wife, and as
that's
opposed
hard.
to, so I just say that to say, like, I think that's what we're looking at. But I want to go back to what Nick said, because this is important. And it is kind of the reason I brought it up earlier about, hey, well, whose responsibility is this? Is because I want to pivot this back to what we're doing about it as the church, right? In both cases, but specifically in the context of men, because I have a very different context than you guys. And I think even when we were talking about this in the pre-show, we talked about what our own perception of this is. Like, have you seen, or what is your perspective on male engagement in church and in the Christian community with Christianity?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from my vantage point, having spent 8 years in the trenches of predominantly men's ministry, men's leadership in local churches, and all of that, is that it is non-existent, dying, or dead. And the amount of churches that have a men's ministry is dwindling fast. I can close my eyes and point to a church and it'll have a women's ministry, and it'll have a children's ministry, and it'll have a worship ministry, and if they're good, it'll have a family ministry. But men's ministry is literally, I was talking, I think I shared this on a previous podcast. Maybe I didn't. I was in a room with a pastor, a couple different pastors, and he was sharing that their church has a $5 million budget. And he said they think their men's ministry budget is $1,500.
Bro.
And I mean, he was admitting to it, first of all. So, like, good on him.
Hey,
yeah.
But
to start.
But it reinforced the topic we were discussing, which is going to the leadership of a church, because this is what I do for a living. Going to the leadership of a church and saying, "Hey, can I talk about or talk to your men's ministry?" is often futile because there isn't one.
It's just non-existent. That's so funny.
Wow. Yeah. And why do you think that is? Because I can speak to the same exact thing. Like, even within our own communities, we have, in our church, we have 300 women will show up to a women's event, and they put it on full production of, awesome things. And they'll do they'll make like a prayer wall craft or something that they can hang in their homes and track prayers and stuff like that with their family. Or they'll do a craft of some sort, and they build community, and they have multiple events. And the men's events that we would have, or that I've seen, not just in the church that I'm currently attending, but just throughout my understanding and my experience in church, is it's like, well, we'll do a men's breakfast. to which half the men already can't go because they have to be at
working.
work so early. Or it's like, hey, we're going to have a men's meeting in the evening, and that
Which you want to do
happen.
after you work all day.
Right, exactly. That doesn't happen very often. Or, hey, let's do a men's retreat. And like, now I got to take off time from work. Like, it seems like, for instance,
Do you know why?
for it's just so because our life is so work central. You know,
and exactly. And you know what that tells you, Josh? Do you know why men's ministry sucks at the local church? Because do you know what men's ministry is? The church.
Well,
Yes,
I'm saying specifically.
No,
I'm saying specifically for.
Except for you can't just say that and then hope it happens.
No. I agree with you. But this is the problem. Men don't do sewing circles. We don't sit around and talk about our feelings and not do anything. That's why, like, the most marginally successful Bible studies that you'll have are centered around beer or smoking cigars. Because guys, at a minimum, need to be doing something and have something to help them open up to talk about their feelings if that's what they're going to be forced to do, like at the end of at the end of a long day of work or at the beginning. But my point, Josh, I'm just being funny, but I
agree with you. But
is this men? The model of men's ministry is the work of the church, and they've come to feel this more and more as time has gone on, that the only effective way to disciple somebody who has decided to follow Jesus. And again, when I'm talking about church ministry towards men, I'm speaking about Christians, discipleship. I'm talking about people who are on the path of greater depth and understanding of who Jesus is because they want to, right? Like they've decided to pursue a deeper understanding of Jesus, right? But the work of the church is the co-laboring. It's you need to get them active in the business of the church, which part of the reason that I think you look at lack of service in society, like we used to talk about this in house church all the time, right? Like like the Israelites, they would show up, they would do what? They would, before they left, they would build an Ebenezer, right? They would build an altar to signify and to mark what God had brought them through to that point before they left. And then they would build a tent instead of a house. Why? Because they know that it's temporary wherever they're at. And then the third thing that they would do is they would build a well, right? They would build a well because they would bring something that left something that contributed to the community or the society or the place that they were at. Some life-giving effort. And so no matter when they came or they went, like there would be something to testify to the power of God that had brought them to that place. And then there was something that would draw people to it, a need that would be met. And if you look at what the two things that I think churches struggle with the most is how do they actually get active and engaged in their community, and how do they engage the men? And the answer to this is the same thing. Like your men struggle in the church because you haven't put them to work. Mark Driscoll said this. He said, men are like pickup trucks. You know, you don't put anything in the bed and they're squirrely and they'll end up off in the ditch in the road. You know what I mean? They've got too much horsepower and not enough traction. But if you want them to track right, if you want them to do good, you put a little weight in the bed and they trug along just fine. And that's what we need in the church. But to your point, Nick, we're not doing that. What does that look like? How could we do that? Have you seen anything that's worked?
Yeah, I just want to make one point to kind of reiterate what you're saying, Josh, is we don't have the weight in the pickup truck, if you will, by having just a
sewing circle,
a meeting of men where we get up early and we do a quick Bible study.
Cornhole beanbags.
Yeah,
get out of here.
So, but
watch monster truck rallies.
What is the idea? What does that look like?
Again, I'm not. Yeah, I have happened upon finding myself as the men's ministry leadership director at my church. And
so we got you on the record of what you'll be doing.
Might have a take or two on this. On top of serving for 8 years in ministry where I interface with thousands upon thousands of men's ministries. I would say the ones that are thriving are the ones that have figured out there's no prescription here, but I would say focus, first and foremost, focus in that most churches, dude, I could go on a huge tangent about this, but it's like they are not focused on the right things. And they're very concerned with Sunday morning and the slides and the order of the slides and the number of announcements. and the amount of volunteers for the children that are going to get dropped off.
Yep.
And
that's interesting.
There's this unfortunate, it's not malicious, although I might call it stupid, reordering of priorities. And I don't know how. This would be an interesting phenomena to discuss, but for some reason, the focus of the priority of men has like gone to like the very bottom, or second to bottom, or third to bottom in my encounter with thousands of churches in the West.
Okay.
Is this in the worship service, or are we talking about in the men's ministry, or both?
No. On the whole.
On the whole.
Okay.
On the whole.
On the whole.
Okay.
Not like they don't have a men's ministry. I mean,
so-
like on the whole.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So this brings us right back to the article again, which is good, because let's talk about this. The reason that that's the case, the reason that the focus is the kids and the service, is because you got the men through the kids, because you got the mom through the kids. Mom wants a break. Kids have to be taken care of. Dad'll show up if mom's happy. That's the model. And that has been the model for 100 years. I'm dead serious. So when you go to any
you're not
convention,
wrong.
the conventional wisdom, and that's why everything in the service is geared towards women. It's geared towards women. If you show up and we got this flowery worship service. Look at the decor of a church. Tell them that was not designed with an appeal to men, especially in the modern Western evangelical church.
Older Reformed churches with the rich mahogany.
Yeah, better. Yeah, I'm here in Europe. Let me tell you something. The churches I've been walking into around here, these were designed with like to appeal to
the pulpit
grandeur.
is raised at least
It's
10
an
feet, and it
eagle
still
or a
smells
battleship,
of
like,
pipe tobacco.
The word of God is like being supported by the talons of an eagle with its wings outstretched.
Right.
Like, you're like,
Right.
a dude designed this for sure.
So beyond right.
But my point, Josh.
Go ahead.
All right. So my point is this, that you're absolutely right, Nick. It's a fundamental priority shift, because we've been trying to get families engaged. And I see this in chaplaincy, because what I have found working with 18 to 25-year-olds, predominantly, is that the young guys don't care until they were raised a certain way, and they're just bebopping along trying to figure out life, right? They're trying to find their place in the world. If they hit a wall, they'll come and engage.
Right.
If they're going through a hard time, they're going to look at their peers and the ones that have got it together, and those kids that are raised in good homes and who have been discipled. They become like the nuclei of a group of Christians, right? But apart from that happening, the next time I get to really speak to them about the gospel, apart from some crazy life event happening, is marriage and children. It is at that point where a man realizes how under-equipped and underprepared he was for what the rest of his life is going to look like. And he is looking for the guidance and how to, to drive and move forward in that. So yeah, like that's why our church has been focused on, like, hey, how do we get the next time we get a shot at the men is basically once they're married and they have kids. And so like the whole trap is set and baited for that season of life and everyone afterwards. And we're not going after the guys in the 18 to 25, or really which really starts in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade when you're instilling the vision of what it looks like to be a man,
Well, there's not I feel like also within the problem with men's ministry, or as the church as a whole, oftentimes as it relates to men, is they don't have the kind of, what is it? What's it called? Like the fraternity of masculinity within churches.
There's just no foundation to start anything on. You're right. And no one has any idea how to build that.
Well, and I will say, so when I was in Lynchburg, last 2 weeks ago with you guys, I went to a church that was a little bit more on the Reformed theological side, which did elevate, I think tends to traditionally elevate a more man as the head of the family and the family unit and leader. And one of the things that I recognized about my time at that church as opposed to the church that I'm going to or churches that I've been in the past is the man came into the church leading the family. They were the first ones in. They shook the pastor's hand. They gave the update for the family of how they were doing. And then, the women went and talked with the women, and then the children kind of went and ran around. But there was definitely seemed like there was a fraternity of masculinity as a check-in to say, hey, brother, how you doing? How's your family? How and there was some intent with those conversations, some expectation to say,
that's it.
Hey, and so
that's it.
Because of that, now when I go to church, if I'm in that environment, I know that I'm going to be held accountable. I know that I'm going to be held responsible for the way that I've been treating my family and leading my family. It's going to be known if my children haven't been keeping up with the catechisms and they're not memorizing the songs and all of these things. And so there is an expectation from a masculine standpoint from the older men teaching the younger men how to be fathers, dads, husbands in that aspect.
And that it's
I don't know
Josh,
what it would look like for the older women though. I just don't.
I know. I think it's the same. I would say very similarly. I think this is really what it comes down to. And I talk about this when I talk about discipleship. I love the military and I love ministering in the context of the military because the framework exists. I can simply say, like, we have expectations. You don't get to show up and just come as you are. And it's okay. Of course you can come as you are. You can 100% come as you are. It's not going to be comfortable, right?
Right.
It's not supposed to be comfortable. If you show up Sunday morning to church and you're yelling and screaming at your wife or your kids are screaming at your kids and you can just keep doing that without feeling any level of discomfort, you're failing as a congregation. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't about grace. Like, it's about both things. Your life and interaction with people should be such that is obvious that you care, that you love them. So that in the moments when you come to that person and you say, hey, I love you, but you're doing it wrong. Like, or to be able to have the conversation, and I do say this is different between women and men, and I don't know exactly the best way to do this with women, but with men, when I have a young man comes in, especially if he's, a Christian or whatnot, and he's doing the wrong thing, I can look at him and say, stop. Like, you're having a bad time because you're being dumb. You are doing the thing that you're not supposed to do. I love you. Stop banging your head against the wall. And that's the problem, is that people don't understand that following Jesus, saying Jesus is Lord, means that you're subjecting yourself to his ways. And when a brother in Christ holds the Bible up to you as a mirror and says, you're not same, then you need to...
That's the word of the idea of the word for rebuke or reprove. That literally 16, it is actually the way that the Greek word is used is for correction, calling out somebody to recorrect or reorient their path. It's not a punitive. It can be, but it's not necessarily used punitively to say, there's a punishment here, but rather of like, hey, you're veering off. It's like a honk on the road. You're veering out of your lane.
Yes.
Hey,
but here's what you
get back
can't
in
do.
line.
You can't go around slapping people in the head with the Bible and pointing out all the things that they're doing wrong if you don't have a track to put them on.
Boom.
And
that's
the problem that the church has, is that the church doesn't know what to do. The church does not know what to do with men because there's only one job in your big church for the man. You've got we could have you teach. We could have you teach, but we already have a teaching pastor, and then I'm the pastor, so you can't teach. Maybe you could teach the men, or the Sunday school, or you could hold the door on Sundays, or the security ministry is really important. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus or talk about like how long it takes for churches to engage men who are actively serving super long term, to like how long it takes people to get employed. But like in the active work of the ministry. Or what's worse is they put it on them. Hey, young person who has no idea and is learning about the Bible, find a way to be helpful. You plug in, get set up. Like, no,
Or, you know
like,
what's
who's taking them along on the work that is ongoing?
When there's ministries that that don't exist, essentially, that men need, right? And a man will be like, hey, you know, I just really feel a passion for XYZ ministry, and I need help. Where can the church help me? And instead of the church saying, hey, that's a good need, let's talk about it, instead it's a tap on the shoulder and say, why don't you start it? Right? Like it's like we need to start building, you know, things that are important, ministries that are important. But also one of the things that I valued, and I saw, like, when I was staying with Matt and Christina, great family, beautiful family. And one of the things that conversations that I had with them about their church and how it's grown. And Matt is such a loyal friend, you know, and he's loyal to the mission as well. And so when the church says, hey, let's get to know people, he's inviting the people that are there for the very first time. Who's here for the first time on Sundays? Talk to Matt. You're going for dinner tonight, right? Like, that's the kind of thing, to the extent where it's like, man, this is a lot of stress on the strain on the family. And I asked him, I was like, you know, why doesn't that happen in churches today? Like, why don't we reach out to the people that are there for the first time and have them over for dinner? And he said something that was really profound. And he said, because people value their privacy over vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because when you have somebody in your home, it's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And they get to see you for who you are, and your family for who you are, and your kids.
And what would you say, Josh? What would you say to that person who says, you know,
it's too hard?
Yeah.
I don't want to be exposed.
Yeah.
What do you say? You say, well, you hold up the Bible and you say, hey, this is the mirror, right? This is who we ought to be, right? And it's not just, this is hard. It's the whole family being vulnerable. But you know what? Who Jesus called us to be? We called us to be the light to the world and to bear fruit. And you know what? Having people in your home and sharing a meal with them and praying for them and being vulnerable with them and bringing them into, you know, the community of saints, that's a hard thing. But that's the church.
Yeah.
Ministry was never like this. We went from a place at a time where Paul's last instruction to Timothy in 2 Timothy, he says, do the work of the evangelist, endure suffering, keep sound doctrine. That was the instruction that Paul had to Timothy. And now in church, what we have is
risk avoidance.
Don't make a mess. Don't make a scene. Take care.
Don't upset the donors.
Don't upset the structure. Please come to church. Follow and do what your wife is telling you to do. Like we don't have that type of instruction to men anymore.
We'll perish for lack of vision.
It's so weird. Yeah.
Nick, what were you going to say, bud?
Oh, I mean, I don't exactly remember, but something to the effect of your comment around we don't have a track for men. I think, and Anderson, your story about what is the trend. The trend is someone expresses a need and the church leadership says, that's a great idea. Why don't you go do it? Is because there's a void. There is no track. And so, you know, I didn't exactly answer the question earlier, but like, what can a church do after focus, after saying we're going to make this a priority and properly orient it in the like top 5 category where it's supposed to be? Then it's something to the effect of creating a culture / fraternity / brotherhood of just doing life together. Because if you created some program and said, here's how we're going to engage the men in our church. Anytime there's a new person who visits, one of our men has to go over to them and invite them for dinner that evening at their house.
System.
Like,
that's wrong.
It just doesn't have any foundation. And so like rather you would want to create, so yeah, like it's complicated.
Build that foundation and expectation.
It's not easy.
To say that it's a struggle. Yeah.
I would say by and large, you have gone 90% of the way there if you refocus and reprioritize men in the church. And it was funny, I had this conversation the other day around our work and the work of Proven Men's Curriculum and the vibrancy we see in men's ministries when they focus on self-control, discipleship, and sexual integrity. And it's like I can almost guarantee with certainty, looking at a pastor and say, your job will get easier if you do this.
Yes.
You will have more men
Hey.
that want to do more things.
All right.
And then Hughes now has a soapbox. Go.
Oh, go. He's right. He's
done.
absolutely right. Because
I teed
let me
you
tell
up.
Let's land the plane.
Let me tell you, this is where I want to land the plane, because here's the optimism, right? We've bashed your own church. All the men are sitting here smiling, nodding, and be like, yeah, my church sucks, and all these pastors are going to be like writing us, going like, what did you tell Jim Bob and whatever, talking about this? I'm telling God about this podcast says I'm a bad pastor. You might be, but there's hope. Here's the hope. So, like I said earlier, I work with my unit has 700, mostly young men between the age of 18 to 25. Let me tell you what I've seen over the last couple of years. Over the last 2 years, I've seen a Bible study start organically that I didn't have to be the nucleus of. I've seen countless young men come into my office, and they grew up Christian or they were having trouble, but when someone looked at them and showed them the vision of what God is doing in the kingdom of God and told them that they don't just have a part, but that they're failing if they're not engaged in it, and put that expectation on them, that they did it, they engaged. I've seen young men connect with their families, start leading their families to start going through it because somebody told them that was actually the right answer, and then they showed them and connected them to the resources to get connected. Expectation is one of the heaviest weapons that a man wields. Thank you, not yields. We have a responsibility to communicate the expectation. My son asked me the other day why he has to feed the dog. He's 5. He's almost 6, but he has to take care of the dog. He feeds him in the morning, he feeds him in the evening, he takes him out, he brings him in, he wipes his paws, and the girls have to do other things. But he said, why do I have the dog? Why do I have to do the dog? Why doesn't anyone else have to do it? Because I looked at him and I said, because you will be responsible for people one day. They, God willing, will be taken care of. You will be responsible for not just yourself, but other people. And the sooner you realize that, and the sooner you learn that that's your job, the better you will be at it. And that is the whole point. That is what Paul models, what Timothy models, what Jesus modeled, for goodness sakes. And we're seeing it happen. So this is where it comes down to. God's moving. People are seeing the fruit, right? People are seeing what is good. And they're starting to see the rottenness that is the promises of the world and postmodernism and all this ridiculousness. But when they come to the tree, when they come to the well, what are they going to find, right? So that's the challenge to say, hey, I want to encourage you guys. Man, we're seeing good things. I'm seeing good things. I think this is tremendous news. And I think it's encouraging even for the women. I think there's an opportunity here. I think there's an opportunity to really look at what's happened with the men and start looking for those female voices, and for the men's role in that, which is not wholesale, but for our role, what are we doing to elevate, celebrate what right looks like, and show it as something that we value instead of thirst traps. I don't know what the trad wife equivalent of a thirst trap is, but how do we elevate positive role models, and make that something that women are like, oh, yep, look, of course you're into that. Yes, I am. I am into a God-fearing woman who, loves her family and loves the Lord and contributes to her community in a meaningful and eternal way. I'm all about that. Because if we do that, then that's what young people will gravitate to, because contrary to what they would have us believe, they have no idea what they're doing and they're terrified. And all they're trying to do is figure out which way's up. That's it. They're just trying to figure out which way's up so we can show them, instead of sitting here saying maybe I'm right. This is my idea. This may
right.
Show them which way's up. It's not hard. Anyway.
Take them and lead them on the adventure. Lead your family on the adventure. Provide the security. Provide the vision for your family. Provide the vision spiritually for your kids and your wife and those who are under you. So, I think that's a good place. to land.
This has been another amazing episode of the I'm Telling God About This podcast. If you are still here and you are still listening, you have already and are a subscriber. We would love a comment from you down below. So like and comment, because that helps the algorithm tell more people this is good stuff. And we love interacting with our comments. So comment below.
Till next time.